Is Dark and Darker worth it to play as a free-to-play player? The answer depends on what you want out of the game. If your goal is having a player versus player extraction game, there's a lot to be desired as a free-to-play player. If your goal is to run solo or treat it like a co-op game with friends, where it's mostly a player versus environment game with occasional player versus player, you should be able to get 200 or 300 hours worth of fun out of it. Let me tell you about how I go about playing games so it can show you how my opinions were shaped. If I like the feel of a game or see someone I watch enjoy a game, I jump into it after seeing a little bit more. Very few times do I go into a game blind. Watching a basic or even a medium level intro into a game are things I enjoy doing. Actively learning about games is what I do, because otherwise it would take me too long to learn most games. It still takes a while for me to become decent at games, but I can brute force it with time investment and my ability to not get bored of doing repetitive tasks or stuff that people mostly find mundane. I won't really go into how to play the game, as there are many content creators that are amazing at doing that and really love the game. So I don't believe I'll be better at them, or better than you just looking up a quick video links. So why does this game leave a lot to be desired as a PvP or player-focused combat player? First, the combat is kind of very simple. Because of the setting up how and when you take a fight is much more important than the actual second-to-second combat decision. So it's a stylistic choice, and if that's what you like, that's what you like. If not, then it's not going to be the game for you. This is fine. Some game focus on second to second, like I say, where this is really a dungeon crawler that wants you to pick your time. It wants you to play with the lighting even, but it does leave you knowing how most fights should play out, given enough experience. The classes are very rock paper scissors, so unless you're really going in duos and trios and you're doing something, there's very little creativity to how you're going to take a fight. And it's mostly relying on repetitions on making you better at what your actual class does. Because of how loot drop works, and being confined to normal runs and not high rollers, which have faster enemies and better loot at the cost of a gold entry, you're put into a lobby where most of the time, if you're wearing green gear, blue gear, anything above 80 gear score, you are more valuable to loot than most content on the dungeon floor, outside of like bosses and or runs. Most people with experience know this, and they will fight as little environment as possible to maximize their chance at player combat. Sometimes it's few and far between, sometimes every other room you're going to fight somebody, and there are people that are going to be looking for you in every room. Your gold earning ability is not even a third of somebody who gets the same loot but could sell it on the marketplace. So if you're free to play, your ability to earn money is vastly, vastly lower, meaning the amount of time that you need to invest into getting a great set of gear is tremendous compared to somebody who has paid for the full experience. And with around 50 hours of gameplay under you, you should have no trouble with the monsters part of the environment outside of bosses. So you're playing the game to gear yourself as much as possible, but it's going to be way slower than other people. And if you lose it, your way up the hill will be as hard as the first time. No lucky drop will slingshot you back into a full kit. And if you wish to play at a gear score of 125 plus, your chance of winning becomes very low because the way that matchmaking works is you're going to be match made with people who have 300 or more gear score. Their stats are going to be quite a lot better, and unless you get the drop on somebody, it's going to be very hard for you to win that. Normally, there would be a lot of risk and reward that you have to think about when you're trying to decide if you want to bring a blue kit into normals. Uh, no matter what kind of gear you bring, you always have a chance to win as long as you pick your moment right. But the reward for a free member is a fraction of the gold of looting of the person that you actually killed. Meaning, one good run won't make back your value like a paid member that can sell it on the marketplace and use trading. This makes you want to save up a much higher quality kit before you take the jump into 125 plus, just because of how matchmaking works. Um, Leaving you with the choice of staying under 125, not getting to experience like the high end of your class, because you're going to be risking more than 10 hours worth of like your gold on a run that has no chance to make it back, unless you extract 5 or 6 times in a row, and even then it's very risky. It's very iffy. So if you want player combat, there's quite a lot for you to experience in the free version, but it heavily, heavily incentivizes you to spend money for the convenience and actually getting to experience the high end of your class in a not infinitely long amount of time. Um, so what can you expect as somebody who doesn't really care about player combat? First, just because you're not a fan of it does not mean people will leave you alone. If we look back at the previous point about how loot drop works in normals and the fact that you're probably gonna have a little bit more than anything that somebody else can loot from a chest, your body is a glowing walking chest in dungeons. You have to like player combat or you will be frustrated at how often it comes up because it does come up just because of how loot works. And sometimes it comes up often, sometimes never. Well, so the combat is still basic, and you get the hang of monsters easily until you come to the bosses. And easily is obviously relative. Like it's still 50 hours to get through every single little mini boss. Because mini bosses I count among the monsters. The loot drops are still not great, even though the bosses pose a challenge. So the boss loot won't make or break whatever you're trying to do in your player versus environment. So if you really want to immerse yourself in a dungeon crawling and beating a really big monster, it does have everything that you want, but you're just not gonna really get geared from it. The issue comes with how to get to the bosses and work on beating them. The way queuing up works, it takes time. We will skip talking about the ice map as it requires a lot of people working together for you to succeed at this point in dealing with the boss. One map has two bosses, and you can queue for it every 6 minutes. It's the Goblin Caves. So depending on how long your match takes, that means in between runs you have to take at least like 3 minutes on average of a break without being able to play. You have to understand other players also know that bosses are probably the best way of making money, and especially paid members are going to be really going for it. On Goblin Caves, there's a lot to be earned, especially in solos. So let's say you're going to be contested in half of your attempts on a given boss. Let's say you win 50% of those fights, and you're actually able to attempt the boss. That means still a quarter of your attempts, you're not even going to be able to boss. So that's something that you have to consider. Then you have to come to terms with the fact that a lot of bosses will be able to like hit you twice or even hit you once and just end your run. So even though the average fight takes 4 minutes to be able to finish it, depending on what kind of a class you choose, you can still die in the first 3 seconds, and then you have to wait for your queue off the map. So the amount of time that you need to invest into learning just the bosses, it adds up quite quickly. I myself had to look up a lot of videos, and I already knew all of the little mobs. I was confident in player combat for the most part. Um, before I even went to attempt to beat the bosses. And it still took me 100+ attempts to be confident in my abilities to beat them and not consider it like a fluke fight where I got very lucky in just the my spacing. But I actually knew how the fight worked at 100+. That means about 15 hours to learn two of them. There's still three more to go, plus whatever amount of time you needed to be confident in all of the other factors. Now the bigger problem is the next map, the crypt, has three bosses spawns on them, and you need to go down the map, which means you need to survive like the first 12 minutes. You need to go down the red stairs. You needed to wait for the crypts to actually be in rotation. So let's say that you already used 15 minutes. Now you're down in the next section. People are pretty confident when they go down, so you'll probably have one or maybe two teams that are gonna be vying with you. So you need to be again even more confident in player combat, especially with bosses in crypts because usually you're doing them in a group. Um, so yeah. Now you have to consider the fact that the three bosses that can spawn in crypts are random. You don't know ahead of time which boss you're going to go for, which means that you need to know at least the basics of all of the mechanics if you want to get good practice in. So you have to learn on what all three of them do for the most part. You need to have a good understanding, otherwise you just waste the 15 minutes and you're going to die in one or two hits. So it's a huge time investment, and your practice is sporadic especially if you want to do like very specifically this one boss, like you're not guaranteed that. If you still enjoy the learning and bossing process despite these issues, the player versus environment side of this game will last a lot longer than the PvP when it comes to free to play. There's going to be a ton of interruptions and unique moments to your gameplay, but there is a finite amount of time that you're gonna be able to enjoy this game as a free to play player while doing boss runs. Once you learn and are confident in them, your only option is really to turn to player versus player, and that's going to funnel you into trying to be a paid member. Monster updates are not frequent. Very, very rarely does any of the monster mechanics change, which means once you learn them and once you actually have mastery of them, it becomes very trivial to finish them. Even a boss like Cyclops, it took me, let's say, 7.5 hours to learn it. Like, it is trivial to me at this point, which means once you've learned it, there's really not much that's left of the game for you if you're just going the bossing run and just that way. So to sum things up, the bossing route is a lot easier to enjoy as a free-to-play player, as long as you understand that you have the once you get comfortable killing the bosses, your gameplay loop stops. And the player combat route is a funnel to the paid version of the game that you will have to fight against if you wish to remain free to play. It can still be worth it depending on what you like about the game, but the paid version is truly the full version of the game. There's definitely an amount of time that you're going to be able to enjoy the game and not have problems with as a free to play player. But it heavily incentivizes and it heavily gives you convenience if you do pay for it. If you don't like, or if there's something in your brain that just doesn't click with it, you're not going to enjoy your time if you understand this.